How did I get started? That's a good question. Well, I guess really being a lover of books, really growing up loving to read, being a total geek, loving biographies and also loving music and learning a lot about music history when the few books first started coming out, like Sound of the City by Charlie Gillette was one. And just as the more I read, and I thought, gosh, I would love to be able to write a book myself someday. And gradually I was able to.
Wow. And you also have a bunch of other credentials, which will have to run hyperspeed Star Wars style because there are so many of them. But one of them is a book packager. Some people are probably I'm sure don't know what that is. What is that?
That's pretty much when you work with a publisher and you're the person that really puts the book together. You put together a team of people, an art director, maybe some other writers, editors to help you, literally have a little tiny book publishing company of your own, but you partner with a large company that then does the actual printing, binding, distribution, publicity, and all that kind of thing. And I started doing that quite a bit when I was running Rolling Stone Press, which was the book division of Rolling Stone. And we would get deals with, Little Brown, Random House, Simon & Schuster, in which, we would literally deliver them a book that was ready to go to the printer. So I did that for about 9 years and really, learned in the trenches there. So when I left Rolling Stone and moved up here to Phoenicia, I actually started working as a book packager. A lot of times I did books with other teams. So Martin Scorsese did a documentary series on the blues, which came out in '03. So I worked with HarperCollins, who was the publisher, but I worked with a team and we did the companion book for that series. The same thing with a Farm Aid book to commemorate their 20th anniversary. Another documentary series on Appalachia, the music and culture and history of Appalachia, and we worked together with a team of people to do that book as well.
Yeah, a lot of people say they like all kinds of music, but you truly do, it's obvious. But I'm wondering, do you find a common denominator through all the different genres?
Well, I think the music that really stays with me and I keep going back to again and again is that music that's got that emotive quality, the feel more than the technique, really, if you want to look at it that way. And that can tie together old-timey hillbilly music, like the Carter Family, Jimmy Rogers, early Gene Autry, with, punk rock, because it's got that emotive quality that's, really the feelings are coming across, which is maybe more important to me than like some incredible guitar technique or some long kind of jam type thing or something like that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Gene Autry because one of your books, Public Cowboy #1, The Life of Gene Autry, 10 years you spent with that book. What was that like?
Well, that was definitely the hardest thing I've ever done, and but it was a wonderful project because, again, I loved biographies. I still love to read biographies. So here I had to tackle a biography of a guy who lived to be 91 years old and also just had this incredibly diverse field of, in the entertainment business. If you think I stay busy, I mean, this guy, made 5 or 6 movies a year. He did a national radio show, and then beginning in 1950, a national TV show. He toured constantly. He had a traveling kind of variety show. He did rodeos. I mean, the guy just never stopped. He did a whole merchandising thing with his image. So it was a fascinating story, but it took a lot of work as far as research goes to really kind of understand the way he really was on the cutting edge of a lot of these areas of the entertainment industry, and to go back and not only research his life, but also to look at the changes in entertainment while he was a performer beginning in the 1920s. And I didn't work solid on it for 10 years. I mean, I did other projects too while I was working on the book, but I interviewed him for the New York Times back in 1997. And he was 89 at that time. So I kind of, bookend the project beginning with that interview. When I did that, I had no idea I would actually end up doing a book, but then the book did come out 10 years later in '07, which was his centennial. So it was about a 10 years period that I became interested in digging into the life of Gene Autry.
Wow, that's amazing. And what I found interesting too is there are some people that you might expect to be influenced by him, like Johnny Cash and Chris Christopherson, but some unexpected people like Ringo Starr and Solomon Burke.
Yeah, Ringo Starr, Solomon Burke, the Neville, let's see, who was it? One of the Neville brothers is always talking a lot about him. A lot of black artists people don't realize, but they, just like white artist, grew up in that era where the cowboy movies were huge, and even though horribly segregation sometimes prevented them from actually going to the same movie theater as, whites, they did fortunately get to go to the theater and see these movies back in, the 30s, 40s, and they loved Gene Autry. And then, of course, they started being on reruns and TV shows and stuff in the 50s. So that introduced them, and quite a few of them have said he was a big influence in their singing style and things like that.
Wow, even back then, video, the movies, was very important to an artist's career.
It's true. I mean, Gene Autry, I say in the book, he was really kind of the pioneer of music videos, because he came up with this whole thing beginning in 1934, 1935, in that the movies he would star in, which were only about an hour long, they would, maybe be titled the name of one of his hit songs, and of course they would do sheet music, which was the big conveyor of music back in those days. People probably bought more sheet music than they did 78s, so you would have like pictures on the cover of the sheet music to tie in with the movie, and as seen in this movie, Carolina Moon or whatever. And then they would have, of course, the movie that was touring all over the country. Then he would go out and do the show. So he really did learn how to do marketing and all that kind of stuff, and using the visuals to not only promote his own music, but interestingly, it actually helped to elevate the status of country music in those days. Because when he started out, country and western, which was still called hillbilly, was really considered to be kind of, rural country bumpkin type music. So a lot of people in other parts of the country had no interest in it. But then when Gene came out there in his dashing cowboy outfit and used the music to kind of woo the girl and win the day, and it was basically country music, hillbilly music, it became more palatable to people in other parts of the country and people that were maybe, say, more pop fans and things like that.
Right, he basically was an early crossover artist as well.
He definitely was an early crossover artist.
Now, you mentioned outfits, and I don't want to get all Joan Rivers on you, but I love what you're wearing. I love these boots, what we'll get a shot of later. But you are also an expert on Western wear.
Yeah, and actually, funnily, it did kind of come through the music thing, too, because I was a big fan of the Flying Burrito Brothers and Graham Parsons.
Okay.
So a woman named Michelle Friedman, who's a really wonderful fashion historian and a writer who's now out in Oregon, but we did a project back in the late 90s on the history of Western wear, a book called How the West Was Worn. And what both kind of brought us into that was looking at this, the Gilded Palace of Sin album cover and these amazing, outrageous nudie suits, which were covered with
nudie suits?
Yes. Nudie was the tailor, the rodeo tailor in Hollywood, North Hollywood, California, who came up with the rhinestones, the outrageous embroidery details of the outfits. These nudie suits, one of his most famous ones was a gold lame suit that everyone has seen that Elvis wore back in the 50s. Right. But anyway, Nudie started making the outfits for the rock and roll guys. We were like, who is this guy Nudie? And so we went on this quest to find out about the history of these clothes, types of entertainment show clothes, and just kind of how they also actually had some background in traditional cowboy outfits and things like that. So that was a really fun project. So it did kind of tie together music, Western fashion, culture, and also kind of led me to the Gene Autry book, as a matter of fact, because I was out there interviewing Gene Autry and met the people at the Gene Autry, at that time it was called the Autry Western Heritage Museum, now it's called the Autry National Center, but it turns out they were getting ready to do a big exhibition on the history of Western wear. So I told them about this book project my friend and I were discussing doing, and we ended up teaming up together and doing the tie-in book that went with this exhibition, which opened in 2001.
Wow. So, yeah. And you also worked with some other museums, Grammy Museum and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah, the Grammy Museum, which just opened, I believe it was when was that, 2009. I was the curator of photography for that museum and did a lot of research and licensing, thousands of photographs for the museum, which was a lot of fun. And because of doing so many photo books for Rolling Stone over the years, and then, getting photos for books such as the blues book, the Scorsese, and the Appalachia book, and those kind of projects. And then, of course, my own books, Punk 365 and Grateful Dead 365, I really have learned about the amazing body of work a lot of photographers have. So I was able to kind of go out and find all the photos that they needed for the Grammy Museum. For the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I've actually done a lot of editorial work for them over the years. I've put together every year for each induction ceremony since '97 the book that kind of features all the inductees. So I put together a team of writers, again work with the photo editor to put together some great photos for that book. And then most recently I did a published book with HarperCollins for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame called The First 25 Years, which is kind of a look back at the past 25 years of induction ceremonies with kind of behind the scenes stories of what went on, and a lot of live candid photos from the shows beginning, which began back in the mid 80s. So that was a lot of fun.
I wonder about when bands have, let's just say, a little bit of tension between them when they're going into the Hall of Fame. Do they have any say about what goes into the program that you're working on?
Oh yeah. Well, you mean the induction book, or? Yeah, we try to kind of course we're not out to skewer artists who are being inducted. We really want to celebrate their career, but we do have journalistic integrity with these books and don't want to do just puff pieces, and we want a really in-depth look at the artist's career written by a journalist who is familiar with their career and has maybe interviewed the artist or really knows the story. And occasionally there have been some artists who wanted to see the piece beforehand and make some suggestions, but we try to prevent that from happening too much. And most of the time, I think they're very pleased with the piece. And sometimes it's led to other projects. The writers have gone on to work with the artist, maybe doing a memoir or something like that, and other projects, liner notes and things.
That's very cool. Oh, I'm glad you mentioned liner notes, because when albums died, that was the saddest day for me, because I loved the liner notes. They were always my favorite part of the album sometimes. What makes a good liner note?
That's funny you should say that, because for years I've been wanting to do a book of liner notes, like an anthology of the greatest liner notes, and all the different types of liner notes. Well, it is sad because now there are still liner notes, and I do plenty of liner note writing myself, but it is kind of dwindling, I have to say, because now they're in the little CD booklets, and pretty soon they're just going to be things that you download and print out. Because I grew up in that era of vinyl LPs and learned a lot about artists by reading the liner notes. So I think I like the diversity. There were some really kooky ones in the 60s and 70s that had, just kind of out there notes, like The Residents, the band in the 70s had some always weird ones. Frank Zappa had some crazy ones, and Mothers of Invention.
Flying Burrito Brothers.
Yes, Flying Burrito Brothers. And so it's, for me, almost as as an artifact, I love those kind of liner notes. And also when they would get celebrities. Like, for example, right now I'm writing a book on Alex Chilton. I'm writing his biography, and sadly he passed away last year, and I've been going through all of the vinyl. He started out as the lead singer of the Box Tops in '67, so I'm looking at one of the Box Tops 4 albums, the 4 LPs, and the liner notes on one of them was written by Mark Lindsay of Paul Revere and the Raiders. I'm like, what's that connection? And then reading the notes, it turns out that Paul Revere and the Raiders actually recorded at American Recording Studios in Memphis, where all the Box Tops records were cut, and with this incredible team of musicians and producers. So that kind of led me, oh, okay, well, I think I'll interview Mark Lindsay. So I did for the book. So you can see how just even things like, these kind of almost throwaway, they were almost like an endorsement from another fellow musician, can actually really help a researcher later on, or a music fan that wants to learn more about the artist. Now, other liner notes are, of course, like little mini histories of an artist's career, and I've done some of those for some box sets, like the Graham Parsons box set, and most recently a Dolly Parton set that came out a couple of years ago. So, then, it's really like almost writing a little mini book, and those are a lot of fun to write, and I hope that people learn a lot from those notes, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I just pored over those when I was a kid, and you learn who played on other records that you liked, and the producers, and like you said, the history was so often so interesting to read about.